everyone, we are back with another Nancy Drew No Spoiler Reviews, and today we're going to be covering the next 3 books in the series. This is the official start of the Minstrel era of Nancy Drew, published from Minstrel Publishing. So in the real time when these were being published, after books number 78, there was a 2-year hiatus before the next Nancy Drew book was published. So I definitely think we're going to have maybe some differences in the series moving forward in this next era. So starting off, we're going to be covering books number 79, 80, and 81. But before we get started, if you guys are also on your Nancy Drew reading journal and you like to have something to kind of keep a visual tracker of your progress throughout the series, then definitely check out my Nancy Drew checklist posters. I have these for sale on my Etsy page. You can purchase these and they come with a set of stickers to mark off each book you have read through the series. I always love having a visual representation of my progress. It helps keep me motivated and lets me see how far I've come. So if you guys are interested in that, I will have links below to my Etsy shop. And I will also have a link to a printable that I do offer, which is my Nancy Drew book bingo set. These are always such a fun way for me to stay engaged in the book while I'm reading and kind of like play a little game while I'm reading through. So there are 32 unique bingo cards in the set. You can digitally download them and print them at home as many times as you like. So that will also be linked below. And you guys also know there's several things I like to track throughout the Nancy Drew series. So we also have the orphan counter. So I will go ahead and put the previous orphan counter above. All right, so starting off, we have the first book in this video, which is number 79. This one is called The Double Horror of Fenley Place, and this one was published in 1987. So the synopsis for this one reads, Nancy visits a movie set and finds terror on location. World-famous director Hank Steinberg is filming a horror flick in Nancy's hometown of River Heights. The movie tells a spine-tingling story about a haunted house. Most shocking of all, though, is what's going on across the street at an old Victorian mansion called Fenley Place. Whatever happens on the movie set is mysteriously duplicated in the mansion. Red smoke billowing from the chimney, a ghostly figure appearing in the window, and blood oozing from the walls. The special effects are a real scream, but Nancy must find out who is behind them before the movie and the mansion reach the final horrifying climax. Alright, so as far as my bingo sheet goes, I didn't get a bingo this time. I wasn't really that close. My nearest bingo was, I had 2 different ways, and I needed, no, actually 3 different ways that I could have bingoed, but I needed 2 in each of those, so did not bingo this time. And in this mystery, we do not have any orphans to say for this mystery. So for this book, I actually didn't take very good notes this time, and I had started the book. I think I read about 2 chapters, and then I had to put it down for about a week before I picked it up again. So since I had been a little bit, I just decided to start over, and then from that point on, I think I read the book in about 3 sittings. So overall, I do still have this one pretty fresh in my mind. I finished this one up the night before last, I believe. So I didn't end up like taking like super diligent notes while I was reading, and in the end, I just kind of did like more of my wrap-up thoughts overall. But starting off with, like I said in the synopsis, Nancy is in another mystery. This is a River Heights mystery, so she's not really going any places. All of the mystery does take place in River Heights, so has been a little bit since we have had a hometown mystery, as I like to call them. And one thing I did really enjoy in this mystery is that we did have the return of Bess and George. If you guys remember from the last few videos, they've been a little bit sparse here or there in the last few mysteries, so it definitely did kind of like have a real like home roots kind of vibe to this story, since it has been so long since we have heard from them. And if you remember from the last 2 books, Nancy's relationship with Ned has been very up in the air, so I won't spoil anything. There's not really much to spoil, to be honest, in this mystery, but I will say we do have a quick little cameo of Ned in here, so I definitely think that they were mindful to keep that a little bit on the lighter end, but I was kind of glad to have a little visit from Ned in here. So for the story, like the synopsis said, Nancy is on a movie set where Bess has actually snagged a small role. So Nancy's kind of like hanging out, being like the supportive friend for Bess. George is actually on set as well, kind of working like another like behind the scenes kind of job with like craft services almost. So I do love that we do have both of them fairly present in the mystery. It's not just Nancy all on her own this time. And in this mystery, we do have the movie set that is taking place with, like it said, Hank Steinberg. I think that's supposed to kind of be like a sly reference to like Steven Spielberg, in my opinion. That's just how I kind of read it. Maybe they're not supposed to be, maybe it's not supposed to be him, but that's how I kind of took it, especially with like being in like the late 80s. Come on, like Steven Spielberg was all over the place. So I think it was like kind of like a slight reference to him. I think that this is a really good like spooky Nancy Drew read if you kind of like the ones that have a little bit more of like a mysterious spooky edge going on. This would be a really good one to read in like the fall time or in October. You guys are actually going to see this video quite a bit later, but I am kind of reading this in the fall time and it just really got me all of the vibes for like fall and Halloween and spooky season and all that kind of stuff. This was like the perfect time of year to be reading this one. And I will say that for the vibe of this Nancy Drew book, like just the way it was written, I definitely really enjoyed it because I feel like in a lot of the Nancy Drew books, whenever we have these like little side characters, they all tend to be very flat, I will say. You know, there's not really a lot of like personality to them. But I felt like in this mystery, we kind of just got like a little bit more details on certain characters. Of course, some play bigger roles than others, but there was just a little bit more of like personality to all of the characters in this book, which I noticed and I really enjoyed. There also seems to be a little bit more like of a jokey kind of vibe to it in some of the dialogue as well. So it was just something that I really enjoyed because I felt like it just brought the characters a little bit more to life, which I always enjoy. And if you guys had seen my last video where I talked about the Phantom of Venice, I had actually mentioned we have a character in there that is the first time we've ever had a character mentioned being divorced in the series, and we actually have the second occurrence of a divorced character in this book, which I definitely think was very interesting because I really like how it plays into the storyline, and I also think that it just kind of like once again made the characters feel a little bit more real because honestly divorce is just like a very common thing these days, and so with this being back in the 80s, it just felt like it was really kind of stepping into different type of characters that we haven't seen before, especially compared to the earlier Nancy Drew books where everything was just so kind of prim and proper. This one just kind of felt a little bit more realistic in my opinion. So another thing I really loved about this book is that I feel like we have a really good use of misdirection in red herrings. You guys know I love a good red herring in the book, and this one I actually feel like we have several red herrings, which is always more interesting for the reader than the typical Nancy Drew where you kind of know who the villain is right away and then we're just trying to catch him the whole time. To me, those are always an instant bore when it comes to a mystery story because I like to question who is behind what's going on, what are their motivations, and I feel like for this book is kind of one of the first handful of Nancy Drew books where we really get more of a backstory to the villain, quote unquote, or, you know, their motivations and why they're doing what they're doing. A lot of the times we see in Nancy Drew books that it's just a villain who's trying to make money and they're just, that's what they're doing. You know, they just want money. This one I feel like has a lot more of an emotional, psychological, deeper type of motivation behind the character and why they do what they do. And bringing back the red herring thing, it was definitely something that had me on guard thinking, okay, why would this person do it? And how would that differ from this person's motivation? So for me, the thought process of reading through the book was a lot more interesting because I had those internal questions and not just, oh, well, we know it's Billy Bob and we're just, you know, he just wants to make money. So I felt like this one definitely had a little bit more of like a layered idea behind motivations and why. One thing I will mention though is that I did kind of pretty much pinpoint the exact motive and how the story unfolds probably about, I would say maybe like the fourth to last chapter, I was like, oh, I bet this is what the story is, and I will say I was right. So it was a little, at least to me, predictable in that way, but I could see how some people probably might not have put it together until the end, which is always a really satisfying kind of like reveal with the story. But this one was still a very, very good story in my opinion, so much that I actually ranked this one 5 stars. You guys know I do not give a lot of 5 stars out very much anymore. I kind of did early on, but that was kind of before I had more of like a caliber and like a backlog of all the books that I've read and to stuff to compare them to. So now I definitely feel like my 5s are a lot more rare and far and few between. But I also rank the books based on how much I enjoyed reading them, not based on how good the mystery was or how well written it was. It was really just based on how much I enjoyed reading the book, and this was definitely one that definitely kept me guessing on either how things were being done or why things were being done, and especially with the whole movie aspect to it. We have seen a few Nancy Drew books before where there have been like a movie theme going on throughout it, but this one so far has definitely been my favorite with like the movie theme. So this one was definitely just, honestly, I enjoyed this one so much. I also felt like the pacing of this book was actually pretty good. Sometimes there's Nancy Drew books where I feel like it's going so slow in the beginning and then boom, so much stuff happens at the end, or vice versa. And this one I felt was just really evenly paced throughout. I felt like Nancy was uncovering things in a good fashion and things weren't so crazy off the wall as some stories I have read, but overall I thought this was really well done. The one thing that I will have a tiny gripe with, this is not really a spoiler at all, but there are a few scenes where we have like police involved, and I am so surprised that we did not have an appearance from Chief McGinnis, especially since like I felt like it didn't really matter one way or another who the police officer was. So I was a little surprised that we didn't see Chief McGinnis, and honestly if we had, I would have been one step closer to a bingo, honestly. So that was like my one little tiny complaint that I had, was that I was very surprised Chief McGinnis wasn't in this book. So overall, like I said in the beginning, I kind of had a little bit of like weariness with starting like a new Nancy Drew era, because I just didn't know, was it gonna feel the same? Was it gonna feel different? Was I gonna like the changes they made? And so far, at least from this book, as far as I can tell, I do feel like I like the slight changes that they made. This didn't feel like a drastically different series or a drastically different character, but it was all changes for the good, I will say, and it definitely has me excited to start the next book in the series, so we're gonna move on to that one now. So now moving on to book number 80. This one is called The Case of the Disappearing Diamonds, and this one was published in 1987. So the synopsis of this one reads, famous mystery author Beatrice Crown is mixed up in a real-life case more puzzling and frightening than any she's ever devised. Her daughter Karen has been accused of stealing a fabulous set of 6 diamonds. When Mrs. Crown asks Nancy to help her prove her daughter's innocence, the author's car takes a mysterious plunge into a canyon, and her body vanishes into thin air. Nancy sets out to find the missing diamonds and the missing mystery writer, and finds plenty of trouble along the way. A sinister white automobile, a rampaging motorboat, and a sabotaged airplane lead to a fiery climax in the strange case of the disappearing diamonds. So before I get into all of my details, here is a really funny thing that I just noticed this moment as I was reading this. So as the synopsis says, the famous mystery author is named Beatrice Crown. I literally just this moment made the connection that that is an error, because her name in the book is Monica Crown, and I just put that together. That is so funny. I don't know how I didn't catch that until just now. I actually finished this book several weeks ago, and I've been putting off doing this video, and I finally got around and had time to do it, and just reading that right now, there's been so much distance from the book that I caught that for the very first time. That That's very, very funny. So as always with our orphan counter, we actually do have an orphan, a partial orphan, I will say, for this mystery. I will say, however, that the character being a partial orphan actually really has little to nothing to do with the mystery. So there is a partial orphan, but it's just kind of like a coincidental one. And for my bingo card, I actually finally got a bingo. This one I got just one across, and it was a free space bingo, so I kind of feel like I got really lucky with that one. But finally, I feel like it's been forever since I've gotten a bingo. I've had so many near misses, but feels good to finally get one. All right, so back to my thoughts on this book. Now, I hate to do this to you guys again, but I have not been taking the best of notes lately when I have been reading my Nancy Drew books, especially the last couple. Like, I've really not had a lot of time to read them, and I just get like these little short sporadic bursts of reading. So I actually have to say that this one, the book is a little hazy in my mind as far as details go. I definitely know my overall thoughts on the book, but specific details are probably going to be a little bit on the shallower side for this book. So like the synopsis says, that there is a mystery writer who is getting Nancy to help her on a case involving her daughter being involved in a diamond heist. So this one I thought was a really good setup for the mystery, because I kind of like how it's a mystery writer within the mystery book, and I just thought that was a really cute kind of concept. So I definitely really liked that. And this one actually starts out like pretty interesting right away, I will say. Sometimes whenever I'm reading the back covers of the Nancy Drew books and I'm like, okay, this is how they're setting it up for this big kind of thing to happen, I was actually very surprised at how soon the first kind of like big thing happens in the book. So that did really kind of like kick it off right away with like, okay, we've got a mystery to solve. And another thing I think this book did really well that a lot of Nancy Drew books in the past does not do is that there were a lot of like red herrings, misdirection in this one. There were definitely a couple options of suspects that we had and for their motivations and all of those kinds of things, which I think that this book did a really good job at. Kind of similar to Race Against Time, where there were like several people that had their motivations and you kind of didn't know who was gonna be the one. I definitely felt like it did a very similar job in this book as well. You know, there were kind of a couple paths you could go down, and I do have to admit, I really did think it was gonna be one of those clear-cut cases where there was like a super obvious connection, which I did think that was going to be the original one, but what it did end up being was definitely on my radar as well. So it wasn't like some big huge gotcha at the end, but I definitely liked, there were some winding roads that we went down, and I definitely think it made the book pretty interesting. And funny as it sounds, this book did kind of give me a little bit of like almost Legally Blonde vibes. Now I may have like just thrown some people for a loop if you've read this book, but specifically when like Nancy ends up visiting a certain character in jail, you know, she's kind of got to like get alibis, get the story right, you know, trying to figure it all out. It kind of reminded me a lot of the scene from Legally Blonde where Elle is talking to Brooke Wyndham and she's like getting her alibi, and Brooke's not wanting to tell her because it ends up being that, you know, spoiler alert for Legally Blonde, that the fitness coach had lipo and that was her alibi. It wasn't quite to that extreme in this one, but just those scenes of like Nancy in the jail trying to help like an inmate, I thought it was really interesting, those kind of dynamics, and that's just kind of what that scene reminded me of a lot. Oh, one other thing I did quite like is that we do get a little bit of a time frame of when this mystery is supposed to be taking place. They don't like have to be like, okay, today is May 9th, you know, to that extreme, but I like when there's a little bit of a hint of the season or the time of year. So this one, I think it probably started around like either the end of September or early October, because it mentioned that there were some characters that were supposed to get married in about a month, which was close to the Thanksgiving holiday was what they mentioned. And then later it is confirmed that the mystery is taking place in October. So I know that's a little detail not a lot of people care about, but I just love whenever we kind of get, you know, vaguely what time of year it is. I mean, even if it's just like it was a fall day. It was a spring morning. I don't care if it's that vague. I just like having some kind of indication, because a lot of Nancy Drew books just kind of feel like eternal summer, pretty much. Another little detail we learned for this mystery, George is actually working part-time at the country club giving tennis lessons, and Bess is actually working too. She's working at Norman's photography studio as a photo developer. So I always think it's really kind of fun how, especially in these later books, Bess and George tend to have like these little odd jobs that they do, or you know, here or there. Sometimes they actually end up tying into the mystery as well, which I think is a little bit creative writing, but I just like seeing that they have jobs. I think it's interesting. So one thing I will say, I think in the end, the kind of motivation for the true villain wasn't necessarily as strong as other routes they could have gone down in here, but I think that if they had gone down those other routes, they would have been more like straightforward and a little bit more obvious. So I did appreciate that this one was a little bit more covert, but I definitely did have my suspicions off the bat, but I don't think it's one of those like super clear-cut kind of mysteries where from page 5 you're like, okay, this person did it, and you know, you're just kind of like watching it all unravel throughout the book. So going back to how like I haven't really been able to like sit and read like my books very much, like in long periods, like I just kind of get little bursts here and there. I do think that for me, this one was a little bit hard for me to follow along just from that constant like interruption. But this is actually the very first time that I have read the Nancy Drew book, and then I actually went back and listened to these audiobooks that I have found. There's a channel on YouTube that does like text-to-speech versions of the books. It's not perfect, it's still, you know, like AI text speaking, but it's good in some ways, but sometimes the intonation is a little bit off. But it was really interesting actually like reading the book and then listening to the book again, because I already knew the story, so I could like really listen to for details a lot better. And I actually really enjoyed that because it just kind of like made the story like flow along a little bit easier for me, and like I picked up on details differently. So it was definitely a really interesting kind of experience to read the book and then listen to the book. I don't think I would ever just listen to the books because I do enjoy the reading process so much, and I feel like I would never want that to like replace the kind of like reading experience. So I definitely think in the future I will be listening to some more of the audiobooks after I've read them, because you really do just get a different experience kind of hearing it again. So before I re-listened to the audiobook, I would have ranked this one 2 stars, but actually after like hearing the story again and hearing it kind of all the way through unbroken, I would give this one 3 stars. It really was an interesting one. Listening to it just made it so much more cohesive for me in my mind as far as the story goes. So I actually did really enjoy this one a lot more after the audiobook. And finally, moving on to the last book for this video, we have book number 81. This one is called The Mardi Gras Mystery, and this one was published in 1988. So the synopsis for this one reads, Nancy goes on a Mardi Gras adventure and finds herself in the middle of a $1 million scam. When Brian Seaton invites Nancy and her friends to join the fun in New Orleans, they plan a glorious week of parades and parties in America's most romantic city. But Nancy gets more than she bargained for, a taste of Mardi Gras mischief and madness. Brian's father is determined to possess a haunting portrait of his late wife, Danielle. Then the painting is stolen and held for ransom, and Mr. Seaton is accused of the crime. When Nancy spots a woman in the French Quarter who looks startlingly like Danielle, she follows her hoping to clear Mr. Seaton's name. The chase leads to an ominous warning, a shocking revelation, and the tragic secret behind Danielle's life and death. Alright, so for our orphan counter, we actually have 2 partial orphans in this mystery. And as far as my bingo sheet goes, we actually did finally get another bingo. So I was so excited because this one came right in the nick of time, and we got 1 5-way bingo. We had 3 other near bingos, but just the one in the end. And starting with this book, I printed off like a little simple like reading companion kind of list for me. So I track the book title, where the setting is for the book. I also track all of the characters because that helps me, especially if I'm not like reading a book like quickly. So I just kind of like write down every time a new character is mentioned, and then just like a little couple word blurb of like who they are, and it helps me keep the characters a little bit more straight in my mind. So I'm really glad I did that with this one because there were a lot of characters in this book, and once again we had a lot of red herrings as well, so it was definitely a lot easier for me to keep my thoughts organized. Then another thing I wanted to start kind of tracking, I started doing this for a while and then I quit and then I came back to it, and I just wanted to like kind of track like any like little food items that are mentioned in the story, because I do have like a down the line kind of like little fun project I would love to do. So I am trying to like do the legwork for that now. Then I also started tracking like key clues, like what were the smoking guns, or like clues or items or things that Nancy finds throughout the mystery. And then I did my rating and then notes, and then I also did like a little tag section. So I put like US location, New Orleans, art mystery, family mystery, little like keyword things like that to help me also down the line with like little video topics I would love to do in the future. And then one more thing that I started doing that I want to try to keep up with doing is also keeping track of like how many days each mystery takes. That was another thing I did for like a little bit, and then I just kind of like fell off and stopped doing it. So the way I did it was just breaking it down by page numbers. So like for example, day 1 is from page 1 to 33, day 2 is 33 to 50, so on and so forth. So I just made me like a little quick like fact sheet for this one, and I definitely want to keep doing that in the future to just kind of keep all of my little tracking things all in order. All right, so with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on this book. So like the synopsis mentions, this one does take place in New Orleans, and this is actually the third time Nancy has gone to New Orleans. The very first time was a very quick trip in the Ghost of Blackwood Hall. Then she returns in the Haunted Showboat. Majority of it takes place in New Orleans, and that one was another really fun book. And now we have Nancy once again returning to New Orleans. One little thing I wish they would have done was like a little like throwback comment or something, like Nancy saying, "Wow, it's so exciting to be back in New Orleans," you know, just kind of having a little bit of that like self-referential kind of commentary, like that she's been there before. So far, other than New York City, I don't think Nancy has been to any real world location 3 times so far throughout the Nancy Drew books. So I definitely thought that was a little interesting kind of trivia fact for this one. So another thing I will mention, that this one does take place over Mardi Gras time. So since the book was published in 1988, Mardi Gras took place on February 16th. Now they don't say exactly like what day is Mardi Gras in this mystery. It's kind of just like a week-long celebration of Mardi Gras. But one of the things that kind of like threw me for a loop a little bit was the very first night they are going to like a big costume party. So I don't know if that was supposed to be the actual day of Mardi Gras or not. They're a little loose on like the timing of that, but it just kind of takes place during the week of Mardi Gras. So like it said, Brian Seaton is a friend of Ned's, and he has invited Nancy, Ned, Bess, and George to come to New Orleans to celebrate Mardi Gras. I don't know how Ned would have gotten off of school for that time, but we're gonna have to suspend our disbelief for that one. And we do have the mention that Brian is a partial orphan, as the synopsis stated, but we do learn that it says that Brian's mother died 15 years ago when he was 4 years old, so that makes him 19 years old in the story. And a quick little mention, I really love the costumes that were chosen for Nancy, Ned, Bess, and George for the costume party. The other character, Brian, he chose all the costumes for everybody, and I don't want to spoil it, it's not a key element to the story at all, but I just felt like each of the costumes fit the characters so well. So if you know what the costumes are, do you think they fit the characters well? I definitely think they did, and if you do not know what the character costumes are, then maybe that's a little intriguing thing to make you want to read the book. But like I said, the costumes don't really have any bearing on the story itself. I just thought it was a really fun little detail. And another thing they mention a lot is that Brian, his family is very like well-to-do, so you know, no surprise there in a lot of Nancy Drew mysteries. But they do mention going swimming a lot in February. They do mention that the pool is heated, but I just thought that was very interesting. And even with the heated pool, I just feel like people wouldn't be swimming too much in February, so I definitely thought that was kind of interesting. And then one of like the big major plot lines of the mystery is all about this missing portrait. There's kind of a feud between 2 characters of who it rightfully belongs to, and I definitely thought that was a very interesting plot line, especially if you know the two parties. And there's definitely one character that you would think, well, that is the person who should own this, but they do not. So I definitely think that with that being kind of the main plot of the mystery, it definitely kind of makes you wonder whose head is where as far as a lot of moral things. The next thing I want to mention is kind of another like series first, but I don't want to get too deep into it because it does really pertain to a lot of the actual plot line. But I will say we do have the first mention of a character who happens to be like intoxicated in a certain situation. So I don't think we've ever had a character mentioned before that has been drunk or anything like that. So I definitely think that was a first time for the series. And we also have another big like first time kind of character trait for a character in a Nancy Drew book. This one I definitely do not want to mention what it is, but it will have to do with a certain condition of Danielle. So I will leave that there. If you know the story, you're probably picking up on what that is, but this is the first time we've had a character that has experienced this situation before, which I actually think really kind of made the storyline a lot more personal and a lot more realistic, especially with the circumstances. And I think it overall just led a lot more to kind of like the family drama of the story, which definitely is one of the kind of main themes in the story. We kind of have like feuding family members and things like that. And I definitely think that this certain plot point really kind of makes it even more sad and heartbreaking in the end. I do feel like there was one little situation that happened to Nancy that was very uncharacteristic of her, and it ends up with Nancy kind of being in a situation where she's being followed by a car and like almost getting run off the road type of situation. However, Nancy has the opportunity to see who was in the car, and she ends up not taking that opportunity, and she just kind of like drives away. So I thought that was very uncharacteristic of Nancy as number one herself and number two as a detective. Like, wouldn't you want to know who just tried to threaten your life? But I understand from the writing reason why she doesn't do that, because it would reveal the villain far too early in the mystery. So I see why they did that, but I thought there was a little bit of a weird disconnect there as far as like why Nancy wouldn't have done that. So I think they could have like remedied that a little bit better. Once again, there is another mention of Bess just laying out by the pool trying to get a tan in February, so I thought that was kind of funny. And that brings me to my next point. I really feel like George and Bess could have absolutely not been in this mystery at all, and it really wouldn't have changed very much, because really I feel like it's more of like a Nancy Ned mystery, and Bess and George just kind of like happen to be there, but they don't do anything, they don't contribute anything, so they're definitely a little bit on the lighter side as far as contributing to the mystery. And then we have another interesting kind of situation where we have a new character that's introduced that kind of is serving as almost like a doppelganger type of situation. This one definitely kind of had me thrown for a little bit of a loop for a bit. There's definitely a pretty big plot twist on this one I didn't really see coming, so I thought that was really interesting. And I feel like anytime there is a plot twist in a Nancy Drew book that I don't see coming, I feel like it's a pretty decent one, because a lot of Nancy Drew books do tend to be a little bit straightforward. So that one definitely had me a little bit of a thrown for a loop, I will say. And then one of my last points before I get into like my ranking and all of that, I will say that I loved the setting of this mystery being New Orleans, and I feel like I can imagine it very well and I can see everything, and I feel like it lent to the kind of, you know, slightly like spookiness of the mystery, I will say. However, I feel like this story could have taken place absolutely anywhere in a Nancy Drew world, whether a fictional town or a real world location. It could have been absolutely anywhere, and the story would have fundamentally not changed at all, with the exception of the title being the Mardi Gras mystery. I just feel like I wish there was a little bit more Mardi Gras in the mystery. Like, there is like a ball that they go to very early on, but really that's kind of the only activities and like festivities that they do. And otherwise, if that part was just tweaked a little bit, the mystery could have taken place absolutely anywhere. So I do kind of wish it was a little bit more Mardi Gras focused. And I do have to say, overall, Every time I start a new Nancy Drew book, I look at the title and I think about it and I think, how is this book gonna go? What is the story gonna look like? And this one, I have to say, definitely did not look anything like what I would have thought based on purely just the cover and the title alone. But I still thought it was a really good mystery, so for my rating, I was kind of between two ratings, and like you guys know, my ratings are not necessarily like how great the book is or how strong the writing is or how good the mystery is. My ratings are based on how much I enjoyed reading the book. So for me, I actually am going to give this one 4 stars. I thought it was a really fun mystery and a little bit of like a deeper kind of different motivations that we haven't seen before. This one does tend to be a little bit more of like a family drama type of mystery as well as like an art mystery. One thing that I do kind of peg this one for, at least for not being like a 5-star mystery for me, is it does have to do with the villain or villains. I want to keep that very vague just to like not spoil anything for you guys, but I do feel like the introduction of the villains was a little bit out of nowhere and very late in the mystery, which for me, I don't love when that is the case. I like whenever the villain, maybe they play a very small role in the beginning, but they're there from the beginning, or they have a motivation or something like that. But I don't really like the villain comes out of nowhere type of situation. And I will hint that we do have a little bit of that in this mystery. I will say, however, I do kind of like the villain/villains motivation for why they are doing what they're doing. I think they overshot a little bit, I will say, but I think that their motivation for like why they are doing what they're doing does come from a selfless motive, I will say, but I do think they were a little bit overzealous. Once again, I think if you're familiar with the story and the plot line, I think you might be kind of picking up on what I am talking about. I will say we did have a lot of red herrings in this mystery, which I do enjoy when we have that, because I love when there's a lot of different trails that the story can go down and a lot of different people that would have motivations to do certain things. I think they very heavily lean into a very specific red herring in the beginning, but I think that it's almost a little too obvious. So in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, I think there's going to be something else up someone's sleeve, because this just seems a little too straightforward, even for a Nancy Drew book. And my final thought for this one, I did think that the final reveal fell a little bit flat for me. A lot of times we do have Nancy in a very high stakes, high stress kind of situation that she's got to find a way to get herself out of. This one was a little bit more subdued in how the whole final scene played out, so I think it was kind of a little bit more realistic, but I was kind of missing that last ditch effort of how is Nancy gonna get out of this predicament. Oh, and my final note, but also Bess and George didn't do jack shit the entire book. I was definitely feeling a little feisty there, huh? As always, I really do like to keep these pretty vague and just do like little minor fun trivial facts about the books, because I want you guys to read these books too, and I want you to have your own experience reading them. I mean, if someone just tells you the whole story, the odds of you reading the story is going to be completely different, and it's going to color your entire perspective of the book while you read it if you do. And I would absolutely never want to rob anyone of that experience of reading the book for the first time and having your own little movie in your mind and your own thoughts and ideas, and I would never want to ruin that. So that is definitely why I like to keep things pretty vague. All right, so that is everything for this book. I have to say, I really did enjoy a lot of these last few books that I have been reading. I feel like we're kind of in a little bit more of a slightly renewed sense now that we're kind of in the new era of Nancy Drew books, kind of being in the minstrel era. So we have a long way to go. This is the largest Nancy Drew era. I think it's books 79 to like 158 or so. So we definitely have a lot of books to go in this era, but I'm really enjoying it. There's some little subtle differences that I have picked up on in these last few books, and so far I really do like it, and I hope we see a lot more evolution in Nancy's writings and her stories as far as the mysteries go. But overall, I have really enjoyed a lot of these. I think there's a good batch of books in this one, so if you have not already read any of these books, hopefully this video kind of piqued your interest a little bit and possibly wanting to read them for yourself. Alright guys, so that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on social media. Links are below. And until my next video, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.